I only use Distress Oxide sprays to create a beautiful background and stunning die cuts. Hey everyone, it's Joy here and welcome to my channel. Okay, I am starting with scrapbook.com's Mosaic die. I have die cut from mixed media white cardstock from scrapbook.com, and then I have an A2 size piece of mixed media white cardstock. And what I want to do is kind of tear down the top of this die cut. I don't want the full sheet, but I do really kind of want 3/4 of it about. And so you could cut it, but I don't want this straight across line. So I'm just kind of cutting it to where it looks a little more natural, like maybe this broke off, if that makes sense. And so then what we're gonna do is we're gonna glue this down. This is going to be our background. Now, I'm using a really thick cardstock. So if you're using a thinner cardstock, I would double it up and then adhere it to your white background because you want some dimension. Because when we use these Distress Oxide sprays, you're going to want some of these little nooks and crannies to catch that ink, and it gets a little bit darker in some of those little areas. So I am using liquid glue. I'm adding lots of dots everywhere. I do want to make sure that everything is adhered down nicely before we start using Distress Oxide sprays. Now, like I mentioned, that's all I used to color the background and to color the die cuts, which made this really fun. You get such fun variations using Distress Oxide sprays. I did add water to it, of course, just to kind of help it move around, but no ink pads, no markers, nothing, just these Distress Oxide sprays. Now that I have this adhered down, you can see on my left, I have the little insert pieces to this mosaic die, and I'm just going to place some of those pieces in. I do have that little top piece that I tore off. I'm laying that down so I kind of have an idea of where to place some of these little tile pieces down, just to get an idea. I have my flower that I die cut just to get kind of a visual. So when I'm laying everything out, I kind of know where my flower is going to be, so I don't need to place some of those tiles underneath. But I do want to put those in ahead of time before we start adding color. So I will speed this up here in just a second. I'm going to add a little dot of glue. I'm going to add a piece of foam, a foam square in all of my little places. And then once I start adhering them, I will remove the release paper, add another little dot of glue, and then add my cardstock pieces. I'm doing that because I really want to make sure that these pieces stay adhered because we're going to be introducing a lot of liquid. So I just didn't want to take the chance on the foam adhesive not holding well. So I am using just a little bit of liquid glue because then that's really going to have a nice hold. So I do have these popped up. I think my foam squares are about 2 millimeters tall. You could do it even shorter, but I liked adding these to a few spots and it just carrying it out past the die cut whole piece that we tore. I liked carrying those little solid pieces out past that, if that makes sense. So I'm just putting that back in place loosely, kind of get an idea of where those go, make sure I have them right. And I just think that background is so fun. Okay, let's get to the magic here. I'm spritzing that with a little bit of water. I am using cracked pistachio, salvaged patina, and rusty hinge for this background. So I'm going to start with my two, my teal and my green first. I'm going to add those in places. Then I'm going to add a ton of water. So you want a good mixed media cardstock or a watercolor cardstock because there's a lot of water. I'm doing that because I want this ink to move around. I'm also working on my silicone mat from scrapbook.com. It kind of contains the mess, which is really, really nice. But as you can see, when I'm spraying, I get a lot of ink and water buildup. And so I'm just letting some of that drip off onto my little rag here, and because I don't want all of that sitting there. But you can also see that the ink is moving into some of those little nooks and crannies. I do want that to stay there. I don't want to take that off. So I'm only going to use my rag on that top kind of open spot because I didn't want the ink super dark up there. I would rather have it more dark in all those little open areas from the die cut. Then a little bit of that rusty hinge goes a long way. So I'm adding water to that, tilting it, but you can see it's just kind of moving into some of those areas. I just think this is so pretty. I'm going to add it in a couple more spots. This is very messy, but really fun. So if you don't like the mess, I would say maybe put on some gloves. Adding water again, letting it kind of drip down and seep down in some of those areas. Coming back in with a little more of the salvaged patina over that rusty hinge, not covering it completely though, because I don't want to erase the rusty hinge, but I want it more of that cracked pistachio, salvaged patina mixture color. Let's add another spot, a little tiny spot of rusty hinge, salvaged patina, and a little bit of water. And then that top part up there, I'm just going to dab that off with a dry cloth because I don't want, again, I don't want super dark at the top, but look at how beautiful that background is looking. I'm going to use my heat tool to let this dry. And I think it's so, so pretty. But I'm going to show this to you up close so you can kind of see how that background looks. Those raised areas, those raised solid pieces caught it, but look in the little nooks and crannies where you catch some of that mixture there. You've got, so that was like the rusty hinge. A little bit over here, you have a little bit of the salvaged patina in those. And I just think this background is so beautiful. I'm so happy with it. All right, this is the Honeybee Stamps Lovely Layers Peony. I added a little bit of water, and I'm just using one spray per flower layer of spiced marmalade. And then I'm coming in with my water. I'm going to do kind of the same thing. It's less involved. I'm going to let that ink move around with the water and just kind of dabbing off the stuff that really wants to pool up. And then I can bring my heat tool to this and kind of let it dry how it is. I don't want to move it around a ton. I love the variation with the darker ink and the lighter ink, just depending on where the ink landed, where the water landed, how it mixed, that kind of a look. So now I can bring in my heat tool and let it dry how it is. And I think it made for a very interesting flower. It had a lot of depth and dimension just in the variation of one single color and the water. So after I heat these up, I'm just going to wipe down my surface, get that cleaned up, and then we can start moving forward. I'm going to do the leaves with the cracked pistachio, just doing it the same way, adding a little bit of water, dabbing off the excess. Well, I'm actually adding a lot of water because I really want that ink to move around. And then I can just dry that with my heat tool, but I'm not going to show that on camera because we don't need to repeat that. But just letting that pooled ink just come off of there. Each layer of this flower, I'm going to do a little bit of distressing with my scissors around the edges. I'm loving that look. You guys have probably noticed on my cards recently, I've been doing that a lot to the outside edges of my cards. Now I'm going to do it to this flower. So I'm going to do it to all the layers and the leaves. Let's glue this together. Everything is nice and dry. I like to add just a small dot of glue when I'm putting together the lovely layers, anything's from Honeybee Stamps. To me, that gives it some extra dimension if all the edges aren't glued down directly. And because this paper had so much liquid on it, it's kind of warped, but in a really good way because we also dried it. So it has a little more texture and a little more dimension already. So once I have all of the layers glued together, then you have this really gorgeous layered flower that looks really interesting with all of the colors and the dimension. So I actually had another layer that I totally forgot to I had die cut it, but forgot to bring it into this. So off camera, I ink blended it the same, and then I will adhere that, and I'll show that to you in just a second. But look at how pretty this flower looks. All that different variation of that same color of spiced marmalade distress oxide spray. So here's that last little layer of flower. that I can have right there in the center. And I'm just going to put my reverse tweezers on there to hold that until that's nice and dry. Now let's glue our leaves in place. Remember, I distressed those a little bit, and actually on the leaves, I used my fingers instead of the scissors, like my fingernails, to give that a little bit of a distressed look. Then I'm going to use a piece of 1mm foam adhesive, but I folded it in half, so ultimately it's a 2mm foam adhesive. And I'm going to place that right in the center so I can put my flower right in the middle of those beautiful leaves. Now that leaf on the bottom that's kind of covering up our rusty hinge, I am going to scooch that over a little bit because I realize I don't want that spot hidden. I just think that is such a pretty spot on the card. I don't want to hide any of the rusty hinge areas. I love that this background looks patinaed. I think it's so beautiful. I could just make backgrounds like this all day long. So I'm going to have to do this again with like another die and a different type of background. I'm going to take my fingernail and distress all of these little mosaic tiles that are popped up because I realized they need a little distressing too, but that's not something I would have done till after the inking anyway, so it was kind of something you have to do. And then a little bit of distressing to the edges, and not even every part of the edges, but I'm going to use my scissors and do that just a little bit. I was really debating if I was going to or not, but I felt like it needed a little bit of distressing. Then I thought, one more thing, I need to do splatter on the background. I really was kind of going back and forth of what splatter to do. And then I thought, you know, my sentiment's going to be white, so I'm actually going to bring in some white splatter. This is the Splatter White from Spellbinders. I added a little bit of water into the container, just using my paintbrush, and most of the splatter is going to be on the flower and leaves, but I am going to have some around the card, just a little bit. I didn't want to go overboard. I didn't want everything to be splattered, but just in some areas. And then I think, to me, this was perfect. Adding that little bit of white splatter is beautiful. Look at that. Then I'm going to stamp my sentiment on white cardstock with black ink. This is the Mini Messages Birthday from Honeybee Stamps, and it says cheers to you. So I'm going to ink that up. I'm going to trim that out with my paper trimmer, and then I did use my fingernails on that as well. You could use your scissors, and the only reason why I use my fingernails is because it's tiny. And I distressed the edges of that and added a little bit of foam adhesive behind that. So now that that is nice and stamped, I did that, you know, a few times to get a good solid black stamp. I want that to be nice and sharp, I guess is the word I'm trying to use. And then I'm going to trim that out with my paper trimmer. And I love to add small sentiments to cards like this. There's something about it to me that I just think is so dainty. And so most of my cards probably do have small sentiments because I love that. So again, just doing that little bit of distressing. I did add a 2mm foam adhesive to like the left side because it's going to overlap one of those popped up mosaic tiles. I'm going to put that in place there, and then I can add a little bit of liquid glue, and then this card will be adhered to a white A2 size card base. And then let's take a look at this all finished. I have to say this is probably one of my top 5 backgrounds or top 10 backgrounds I've ever made. I absolutely love this. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you guys think of this technique of just using Distress Oxide inks to color everything. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and watching. I hope you feel inspired, and I hope you have an amazing day.